The whole hen yard made a rush for him, and formed a ring around him. Then they all cried at once: "Ka, ka, ka, da! Serve you right! Ka, ka, da, da! Serve you right!" The boy tried to get away, but the chickens ran after him and screamed until he thought he'd lose his hearing. It is more than likely that he never could have got away from them, if the house cat hadn't come along just then. As soon as the chickens saw the cat, they quieted down and pretended to be thinking of nothing else than just to scratch in the earth for worms. Immediately the boy ran up to the cat. "You dear pussy," said he, "you must know all the corners and hiding places about here. You'll be a good little kitty, and tell me where I can find the elf." The cat did not reply at once. He seated himself, curled his tail into a graceful ring around his paws, and stared at the boy. It was a large black cat with one white spot on his chest. His fur lay sleek and soft, and shone in the sunlight. The claws were drawn in, and the eyes were a dull gray, with just a little narrow, dark streak down the centre. The cat looked thoroughly good natured and inoffensive. "I know well enough where the elf lives," he said in a soft voice, "but that doesn't say that I am going to tell you about it." "Dear pussy, you must tell me where the elf lives," said the boy. "Can't you see how he has bewitched me?" The cat opened his eyes a little, so that the green wickedness began to shine forth. He spun round and purred with satisfaction before he replied: "Shall I perhaps help you because you have so often grabbed me by the tail?" he said at last. Then the boy was furious and forgot entirely how little and helpless he was now. "Oh, I can pull your tail again, I can!" said he, and ran toward the cat. The next instant the cat was so changed that the boy could scarcely believe it was the same animal. Every separate hair on his body stood on end. The back was bent, the legs had become elongated, the claws scraped the ground, the tail had grown thick and short, the ears were laid back, the mouth was frothy, and the eyes were wide open and glistened like sparks of red fire. The boy didn't want to let himself be scared by the cat, and he took a step forward. Then the cat made one spring and landed right on the boy, knocked him down and stood over him, his forepaws on his chest, and his jaws wide apart over his throat. The boy felt how the sharp claws sank through his vest and shirt and into his skin, and how the sharp eye teeth tickled his throat. He shrieked for help as loudly as he could, but no one came. He thought surely that his last hour had come. Then he felt that the cat drew in his claws and let go the hold on his throat. "There!" he said. "That will do now. I'll let you go this time for my mistress's sake. I only wanted you to know which one of us two has the power now." With that the cat walked away, looking as smooth and pious as he did when he first appeared on the scene. The boy was so crestfallen that he didn't say a word, but only hurried to the cow house to look for the elf. There were not more than 3 cows, all told, but when the boy came in, there was such a bellowing and such a kick up that one might easily have believed that there were at least 30. "Moo! Moo! Moo!" bellowed Mayrose. "It is well there is such a thing as justice in this world." "Moo! Moo! Moo!" sang the 3 of them in unison. He couldn't hear what they said, for each one tried to out bellow the others. The boy wanted to ask after the elf, but he couldn't make himself heard because the cows were in full uproar. They carried on as they used to do when he let a strange dog in on them. They kicked with their hind legs, shook their necks, stretched their heads, and measured the distance with their horns. "Come here now," said Mayrose, "and you'll get a kick that you won't forget in a hurry. "Come here," said Gold Lily, "and you shall dance on my horns." "Come here, and you shall taste how it felt when you threw your wooden shoes at me, as you did last summer," bawled Star. "Come here, and you shall be repaid for that wasp you let loose in my ear," growled Gold Lily. Mayrose was the oldest and the wisest of them, and she was the very maddest. "Come here," said she, "that I may pay you back for the many times that you have jerked the milk pail away from your mother, and for all the snares you laid for her when she came carrying the milk pails, and for all the tears when she had stood here and wept over you." The boy wanted to tell them how he regretted that he had been unkind to them, and that never, never from now on should he be anything but good, if they would only tell him where the elf was. But the cows didn't listen to him. They made such a racket that he began to fear one of them would succeed in breaking loose, and he thought that the best thing for him to do was to go quietly away from the cow house. When he came out, he was thoroughly disheartened. He could understand that no one on the place wanted to help him find the elf, and little good would it do him, probably, if the elf were found. He crawled up on the broad hedge which fenced in the farm, and which was overgrown with briars and lichen. There he sat down to think about how it would go with him. If he never became a human being again, when father and mother came home from church, there would be a surprise for them. Yes, a surprise! It would be all over the land, and people would come flocking from East Vemminghög and from Torp and from Skerup. The whole Vemminghög township would come to stare at him. Perhaps father and mother would take him with them and show him at the market place in Kivik. No, that was too horrible to think about. He would rather that no human being should ever see him again. His unhappiness was simply frightful. No one in all the world was so unhappy as he. He was no longer a human being, but a freak. Little by little he began to comprehend what it meant to be no longer human. He was separated from everything now. He could no longer play with other boys. He could not take charge of the farm after his parents were gone, and certainly no girl would think of marrying him. He sat and looked at his home. It was a little log house, which lay as if it had been crushed down to earth, under the high, sloping roof. The outhouses were also small, and the patches of ground were so narrow that a horse could barely turn around on them. But little and poor though the place was, it was much too good for him now. He couldn't ask for any better place than a hole under the stable floor. It was wondrously beautiful weather. It budded, and it rippled, and it murmured, and it twittered all around him. But he sat there with such a heavy sorrow. He should never be happy any more about anything. Never had he seen the skies as blue as they were to day. Birds of passage came on their travels. They came from foreign lands, and had travelled over the East Sea by way of Smygehuk, and were now on their way north. They were of many different kinds, but he was only familiar with the wild geese, who came flying in two long rows, which met at an angle. Several flocks of wild geese had already flown by. They flew very high; still he could hear how they shrieked: "To the hills! Now we're off to the hills!" When the wild geese saw the tame geese, who walked about the farm, they sank nearer the earth and called: "Come along! Come along! We're off to the hills!" The tame geese could not resist the temptation to raise their heads and listen, but they answered very sensibly: "We're pretty well off where we are. We're pretty well off where we are." It was, as we have said, an uncommonly fine day, with an atmosphere that it must have been a real delight to fly in, so light and bracing. And with each new wild geese flock that flew by, the tame geese became more and more unruly. A couple of times they flapped